Hi everyone, and welcome to our new mini-series, the Editing Series. I'm so excited to have two fantastic guests chatting on the show today about all things editing. We have Karen Spiller, the co-founder of ELT Teacher to Writer and ELT Publishing Professionals, and Karen White, who's an ELT project manager and co-founder of Teacher to Writer. Hi both, how are you?
Hi, Billy.
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. How are you, Karen?
Yeah, I'm very well, thanks. Good to be here.
Are you okay for me to refer to you as Karen S and Karen W?
That sounds very sensible. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for coming on the show and agreeing to come on and chat. It's really nice to have you both here.
Nice to be here.
So let's start with you, Karen S. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? So where you got started in ELT and how you got into editing?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose it all started, I did a language degree at university in Spanish and French. And then before I left university, I just turned up at OUP's offices because I thought it would be really nice to go and work for Oxford University Press in Spain, and asked if they could give me a job. And unbelievably, I mean, I didn't have an appointment or anything, but the managing director at the time kind of agreed to see me. And he said, no, it sounds great. It sounds like you've got the right experience and everything to work for Oxford University Press, but you need to get some teaching experience. So when I finished my degree, I went out to Madrid. I taught for a while. And then when I thought I'd probably got just about enough teaching experience, I went to the OUP offices in Madrid and said, can I have a job now, please? And they gave me a part-time job. So for a while, I was part-time repping and part-time teaching. And then from OUP, I moved to Heinemann. And then I was a rep for Heinemann for several years. And then the repping job turned into kind of half rep, half field editor. And as a field editor, I was that kind of bridge between the editorial department, which was also back in Oxford by that time, and the market. So I was kind of giving information back to the commissioning editors and general editorial teams in Oxford about, what teachers were asking for and how materials were going down, and just generally kind of helping them with research. And then when I came back to the UK at the end of '89, I came back still with Heinemann, and I started as an assistant editor. So kind of right at the bottom of the pile in the editorial department. And then I went through different roles, and I ended up being the publisher for the Adult List and Spain. And then in 2003, I left them to set up my own company, which was in the travel industry. I thought I'd have a little departure from the world of ELT. And so I did that for a while. And whilst I was doing that, I started freelancing because as with a lot of companies, it takes a while before you start making any money. So freelancing, being an editor is a trade. You learn it and you learn the skills, and then you can kind of ply your trade in this freelance role. So that was like really handy for me. And then I kind of discovered that I really enjoyed freelancing, and I really enjoyed sort of coming back to doing something that I really knew how to do, because I didn't know anything about the travel industry, or at that point anything to do with kind of the internet, because it was all online and things. So it was really quite nice, and it was to be back in my comfort zone. And it also enabled me then to set up Teacher to Writer with Karen and Sue. And then kind of 2 or 3 years ago to set up ELT Publishing Professionals with Helen, Gemma and Sue. So, so that's my journey into editing.
Yeah. And what about you, Karen W? How did you get into ELT?
My path was different. I've never been a rep. I've never knocked on someone's door and said, give me a job. I came in through teaching. I also did a degree. I did a degree in applied language and ended up working as a teacher in Greece for a year after that. I hadn't got a cert, but I had got some experience from my degree about ELT. Then I went on and worked at Bill Kent University in Ankara, which was a really lucky break, really, because it happened that they were thinking about they had to get their students into their faculties. So in order to do that, they came into the English school, and the English school had 2 years to get the students ready for faculty English. So there weren't really any textbooks around that were right for that setting at the time. So they set up a textbook writing project, which I was very lucky to be part of. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, really, because I went back. I think 12 of us were sent to Reading that summer, and 5 of us ended up writing 2 levels of textbooks, the student's book, the teacher's book, the workbook. I think that was over 2 years. And then I left the project and came back home to the UK. That gave me the insight into the whole materials side of things. And actually, I realised that I was more interested in the materials than I was actually in the classroom teaching. When I came back, I looked for jobs, publishers, and I got a part-time job as an editorial assistant at Richmond Publishing. And then I got a full-time job at Prentice Hall, who were publishing ELT at that time. I think the first week I got to my job at Prentice Hall, they announced they'd been bought out by Pearson. And then I got a job with Burlington Books, who just opened an office in Oxford, and I was an editor there. And then Burlington closed their office in Oxford. So is it me or is it the industry? So I joined Macmillan as an editor and worked my way through managing editor, editorial manager, publishing manager while I was there. I left in 2008 and I set up myself as a freelancer and realised that actually I loved it. Like Karen said, I really enjoyed it. I like the flexibility of freelancing. I like being my own boss. I like setting my own timetable. I like to be able to go to the gym or go shopping and work around the hours that freelancing allows you to set.
Definitely. Yeah. Nice. You've both got so much experience behind you and worked for so many different publishers as well. So I'm sure you've seen absolutely everything there is to see within ELT, to be honest. Okay, so today we're talking about editing. So you both mentioned how you got into editing and your experience as well. But what other routes do you think there are, maybe perhaps for a teacher who's looking to progress within the industry and get into editing?
I think it's probably more difficult for a teacher to go straight into editing than it is for them to go into writing. And I think that's as much to do kind of with the kind of training that exists for editing. So, when a teacher starts writing materials, they might start creating materials for their own classes and so forth. And then they might get hired by a publisher to, write a teacher's book or a workbook or some worksheets and things. They'll improve their writing skills because they'll do a draft, they'll get feedback, they'll work with the editor, they'll rewrite, and bit by bit, they become writers. And that's really kind of without any training. I mean, there are some sort of postgrad courses and things that writers, can do. I think a lot, various universities offer MAs in materials development and things like that. But very rarely, when I think of, that most of the ELT writers, the most successful writers, I think very few of them have actually done any postgrad, courses or qualifications in writing. I would like to think, as I'm sure Karen would, that a lot of them have bought the ELT Teach to Writer books, which have been written by people who've probably learned in this way, sort of on the job, if you like, sort of going through the different stages of kind of honing their skills by getting feedback and rewriting. So that's how you get into writing, and you know all about that, Billy. But so how do you get into editing? I think most kind of editorial jobs, certainly kind of, a proofreading job or a copy editing job or a development editor job would probably ask for previous experience. And so it's a bit of a catch-22, isn't it? Sort of, how do you get that kind of editorial experience? Obviously, I sort of came from a slightly kind of commercial background, and I think that coming from a repping background is actually quite an advantage for moving into editing, especially for development editing or commissioning, because as a rep, you speak to hundreds of teachers from lots of different backgrounds, and you kind of get to understand the myriad ways that, teachers teach and what they look for in their course material. So you bring a kind of different perspective to your editing, all of that information that you've got in your head from having talked to teachers. But when you gave us this question, kind of before we talked to you today, Karen and I both did a little bit of research to find out how other people had got into freelance editing.
Great.
And a couple of the people that I spoke to, one of them said that they'd actually done a postgrad qualification in editing. So I think it was an MA and then something at the what used to be Book House. So they'd learned some kind of proofreading skills, and then they got a freelance job with an ELT packager, which was quite interesting. So rather than going, to freelance directly for a publisher, they got their initial editing gig kind of with a packager. The other person said that they'd had a part-time job at a non-ELT publisher. And then from that, they'd been able to, use their skills, their editing skills that they'd acquired in that context and transfer them over to kind of the context of ELT, where they already had experience as an ELT teacher. So they got their editing skills from a different publishing context, but they had their kind of content skills, if you like, from the ELT context.
And that echoed one person that I spoke to as well, Karen, or that I heard from, because traditionally, Billy, or what I consider to be traditionally, and I don't know, I think Karen would agree, ELT editors tend to have come from teaching. So a teacher, like I did, will apply for an in-house position at a publisher and probably join as an editorial assistant or what used to be called a desk editor or an editor, and come in that way. So you come with your teaching head on, and you come with your teaching experience, and you know how the materials that you're presented with will work in the classroom. And if you're presented with a manuscript and you think about how you would have taken that into the classroom, you can develop it and help work with the author to shape it with your teaching knowledge, but you haven't necessarily got the editorial skills. And that's the editorial skills are the ones that you learn within the publishing house. And then you can, when you've got the experience and you know how the process works and what happens, you can then take that and go freelance. And of all the editors I've ever known or ever worked with, this is why I asked the question the other day, how did you get in if you haven't worked in-house? Because I don't know many people who have not worked in-house. And like Karen said, she's spoken to somebody who had worked for another publisher. I also spoke to somebody who'd worked for a non-ELT publisher. That was how they got, but they had ELT teaching experience. And somebody else said that they had just written loads of emails to publishers, but they had editorial experience in the past, but they were just kind of persistent. And somebody else had a lucky break with getting in some time ago and working with IATEFL. I'm not sure we know the answer to how teachers can get in easily without through the in-house publishing process.
And do you think publishers are willing to take a risk on hiring someone who's coming out of teaching, who has basically no knowledge or experience of the editorial process, and will hire them as an editor? How likely is that?
As a freelance editor?
Or just an editor in-house?
Well, typically if you've just got teaching experience and you haven't got any editorial experience, and a publisher is looking to hire you to bring you in-house, give you a job on the payroll, they'll probably start you kind of as an assistant editor or whatever the equivalent is these days. And it's a good place to start because you sort of, you learn the ropes bit by bit, and you gradually become kind of more comfortable with all of that. And I think, editing is, I think you almost need to kind of go up through the ranks to kind of do all of the different roles, to be able to understand kind of all the different stages of making a book. Because when I came back from Spain, there was talk of me kind of becoming a commissioning editor straight away. And I'm really, really glad that I started off as an assistant editor, so that I could sort of see all of the different stages and the different tasks and how long everything takes as well. Because unless you actually do it yourself, you've got no idea really of the different amounts of time that you need for these different stages. And I think that can be quite problematic then, because if you don't understand that, you can make, as a commissioning editor or a publisher, wild promises to the marketing team about how quickly they can have their books and how all of the components will be out kind of by February the following year. And if you've actually kind of done all of your apprenticeship, and worked your way through the different stages, you kind of know what's realistic and what isn't.
Even so, since Karen and I started in publishing, when I joined Macmillan, they were publishing one level of Inside Out a year, which now, looking back on it, publishers are publishing 5 levels of a 10 component at each level course in, let's say, 2 years or whatever. Things have not crunched, but we know that things are done a lot more quickly these days. Bigger teams, more writers.
Yeah.
Everything is expanded.
Definitely.
So it can happen faster, but still within that time frame, it still takes a certain amount of time to write, content edit again, copy edit, 3 or 4 stages of proofs, and that takes time.
And that's why publishers, I think, when they're hiring people, either kind of for in-house roles and certainly for kind of out-of-house roles, for hiring freelancers, they want somebody who's just going to hit the ground running, because there's no time in the schedules, like Karen was saying, to train people up.
Yeah.
They have to know, they have to have the skills right from the off, really, to be able to do the work.
Do you think that there's any way that teachers, because like you said, it's a natural progression to go from a teacher to a writer, because teachers essentially are materials writers. They create their own content to use in the lessons, and they know what works, what doesn't work. So if publishers are hiring teachers for sort of the lower level editing jobs and they don't have time to train them, how can teachers prepare themselves for that? There doesn't seem to be anywhere to sort of, well, I'm not an editor, so I haven't looked into it too much, but do you know of anywhere that you could get the background knowledge from, or would it simply be Googling or speaking to other people, for example?
As a freelancer, Billy, again, are you thinking?
I just think your initial foray into editing in general, because we touched on the fact that publishers don't maybe have much time now because everything is so condensed.
Yeah. Well, I learned all of my editing skills and how to edit from the people I was working with in-house who had got more experience than me. And when I was put onto my first project, I think it was a teacher's book that was on a Simon Greenall and Judy Garton Springer course. And I had a senior editor kind of working with me, and she was the editor on the teacher's book. But she used that as a way to train me up. So, she'd sort of set me a unit to edit. And then we'd get together and have a meeting. We'd have a look at what I'd done. And then she told me all of the things that she'd thought about and showed me all of the different, changes she'd made and, handover notes she'd written and so forth. And that's how I learned the skills.
That's great.
And I think that if a publisher employs a teacher as a new editor, then training will be provided in some format on the job. But I think what Karen was saying earlier about there not being time, there isn't time for new editors to come in as freelancers. If you're an in-house editor, you'll get training either on the job, or you'll be sent on a training course, or somebody will come in and give you training. I used to go in and give training sessions when I'd left and gone freelance. I used to go in and do in-house training. And likewise, when I was a new editor, there was somebody that came in and ran training courses just for us, because actually there aren't any ELT publishing training courses. So that it would be unfair of us to say, yes, you could go away and learn to be an ELT editor. You can go and learn to be an editor. You can go to the Publishing Training Centre, which used to be called Bookhouse. There are various other places where you can do some online courses, but actually, without being inside a publishing house and actually learning how it works for that, I wouldn't have a clue how to edit a novel. Yeah, I'm quite au fait with the process of, that you go through when you're doing an ELT course book, putting it all together and how they all interlock with each other. But I mean, I think also, I'm wondering, I think publishers now are employing fewer editors in-house. Mm-hmm. So there were few roles in-house as it was, think of all the teachers that come back from overseas each year. Not all of them want to do publishing, but a lot of them apply for publishing jobs, and maybe in the past you would have had 5 or 6 applications for one role, and these days publishers aren't taking editors in-house so much. We know that publishers are using packages, and the packages are using freelancers. Mm-hmm. So where are the next lot of ELT editors coming from?
Exactly. And I think also when you work in-house, I know there aren't, as we just said, there aren't many in-house now, but I think I find it hard to get my head around how you would make the transition if you were an editor in-house to then becoming freelance. For me personally, I was teaching and I was getting writing jobs alongside it. And then I had to decide when that crunch point was for me to quit teaching to end up writing for different publishers. But you don't really have that if you work in-house as an editor. So what's that sort of point?
Well, I think what often happens when an editor goes freelance, and they've been working in-house, is that they obviously have very good contacts within their own publisher, and they're often either at the beginning or the middle or the end of a course that they're working on. So there's quite often that they kind of leave the publisher, they go freelance, but they take some of the work with them. Because if they're, if they've been kind of editing the student's book on a course, and then there's the workbooks and the teacher's books and things to edit, and they are saying, I'm going freelance, but I need some projects, so I could quite easily take these, and I'm in a great position to be able to edit these for you because I'm so familiar with the content of the student's book, and I know how you work, and I understand your deadlines, and I know kind of the people that I'll need to interact with in the different departments. So I think publishers quite like that when editors leave and they go freelance and they sort of continue to do work on the projects that they've been doing in-house. And then I think that's quite nice as well for the freelancer, because it gives them a bit of a cushion, doesn't it? It's not like just jumping into the abyss. At least you're jumping and you've got a bit of a parachute with you.
Yeah,
exactly.
And the other advantage that somebody leaving an in-house job and going freelance would have is that they probably work with colleagues who, I think also I'm talking from my experience here as UK publisher.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of that's where my experience is, obviously. But when we were at Macmillan, often a colleague would leave and go to OUP, another colleague would leave and go to Cambridge University Press, somebody else would leave and go to Richmond. So you keep in contact with those people, and you call your friend at Richmond and your friend at OUP and your friend at CUP, and you say, hey, I'm going freelance. Mm-hmm. Bear me in mind, because we worked on this and this together, and you know what my skills are. And networking and contacts are another, as well as some training and background knowledge and knowledge of the process, contacts are key.
I think it seems almost like within the editing sphere, you can make those contacts a lot easier than if you were starting out as a freelance writer, perhaps, because maybe you haven't got any connections within a publishing company because you haven't necessarily had that in-house step. Would you say it's sort of more connections, possibly, as an editor?
That's a good point, actually. Yes. So a writer can, make good connections with other writers. I think there are different kind of groups, aren't there, that, freelance writers can belong to, and obviously can, network with other writers at conferences and stuff. But they won't have that same background of having worked for a publisher. I think it's also true, though, to say, isn't it, that, and this is as much true for a writer as it is an editor, that, once you get your first opportunity, if you do a good job and you're nice to work with, you'll get more work. And that's, that would be my top recommendation about, how you keep getting work. It's do a good job, and it's always worth kind of just going that extra mile, I think, to to make sure that everyone's pleased with the way the work's been done.
And what do you think makes a good ELT editor? Karen W., you said that you wouldn't necessarily know how to edit a novel, but ELT is different. So what makes someone a good ELT editor?
Well, knowledge of teaching, knowledge of the ELT classroom, knowledge of what your target audience are looking for. There's no good editing a book for teenagers in the Spanish market with, an eye on adults in China. Mm-hmm. Bearing the market in mind, somebody who can bring that teaching experience to the materials, and somebody who, of course, you need an eye for detail. You need an eye for, you've got to bear everything in mind. You've got to always be thinking about the what's the course outline, what's its USPs, what's the publisher trying to do. There's a lot to bear in mind, right from the nitty-gritty, checking the full stops and the heading numbering, all the way back to, does it match the market requirements? And if it doesn't match those early market requirements, then you won't get as far as checking the full stops. And you've got to keep an eye on absolutely everything in between. If you're doing, it's unusual for one person to edit, let's say, a student's book, to do all the process.
Mm-hmm.
So that would probably have a content editor, a copy editor, and possibly even a proofreader or a cold reader. The cold read is done after publication usually. So that would probably be 3 different people, and there are 3 different sets of skills within those jobs.
Great. Karen S., would you add anything else to that?
I think what I'd add is I think a really important kind of quality or characteristic is for an editor to have a real feeling for what makes interesting material.
Mm-hmm.
So both in terms of content, so like the texts, the reading texts which are in the book, or the listening input, so reading and listening, but also in terms of kind of the questions and the tasks that that the author has written. There are some books where I think, oh my God, I'd really love to answer that question, or I'd love to hear my classmates' answers to that question. And I think if you can sort of identify that that's the kind of material, because I think good material is usually good material, and the majority of people respond well to good material. And I think kind of, the most important thing about that is that it's interesting, that it engages people, and that they want to read more or listen more or answer those questions. And then I think, obviously, all of that has got to be underpinned by those kind of technical skills that Karen was talking about, making sure the material has got good flow, clear explanations, good rubrics, that the answers are correct, and all of the punctuation and everything kind of has to underpin all of that. And then the final thing, I think, is that you need good soft skills. Publishing is a very people-heavy and sort of multidisciplinary business industry. And so you need to be like a good communicator, a good team player, good at giving feedback, be committed to deadlines, all of those things which are probably, good characteristics to have in pretty much any job you can think of. But I think they're particularly important kind of in the people-centered profession that publishing is.
Definitely, yeah.
Good software skills.
Oh, yes.
Editing traditionally work in Word, but, more and more you need to know how to do PDF markup, a little bit of awareness of InDesign, other software that's coming along. We're looking now at editing online digital materials using tools like Avalane and digital platforms. So being able to keep up with changes in technology and developments, that's all important as well.
That's really important, yeah. I'm just going back to what you said earlier. I've never really thought about this from this perspective, but when you said, Karen W., that the editor has to pay attention to detail, but also the bigger picture, because I think when you think of editing initially, or the first thing that springs to mind is the detail, but you do have to keep the whole thing in mind as well, which is really, really interesting.
I think that's a common assumption, actually, that an editor is somebody who checks the full stops and the spellings, but actually the editing process starts right back when the author sends in the first draft manuscript, or even before that, really, because the editor, certainly the commissioning editor, would be involved with creating the brief and writing the brief and making it clear to the authors what the whole sort of concept is, and developing that side of things. So you're going right from the blank paper to the finished book.
Definitely.
And it's more and more true, I think, these days that, courses used to be very author-led. So it was quite common that, an author or author team could approach a publisher and say, I've got this great idea for a course. But over time, and I think it's, as a result of a publisher invests so much money when they're creating a course. It's many millions of to create a multi-level, multi-component adult course or primary course. And they have to be absolutely sure that it's, going to be a good course and it's going to be right for the market, and they've got the right people to, to write it and the right team to work on it. And much more so these days than previously, the whole concept for the course will come from the publisher. And the commissioning editor and the development editor, and all of the editorial team needs to kind of buy into that concept and contribute to sort of honing that concept as well. So, which I think is a very interesting role. And it's kind of an emerging. There are sort of some interesting editorial roles which are emerging. I think as that trend happens, sort of people who are kind of the commissioning editors and the publishers are getting more involved in conceptualizing courses. And then another interesting role, I think, is kind of the fact checker editor, because as material, as that kind of made up ELT material kind of sort of recedes into the past, and it's being replaced by kind of much more real material about real people and real events and so forth. And a lot of people kind of get their information from sources that might not be 100% correct. It's really important that there is somebody on that editorial team who's kind of checking the information and sort of knows how to kind of triangulate things and be absolutely sure that what ends up being printed or kind of published on the online platform is correct.
That's very true. Yeah, I didn't think about that. It's very crucial, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
We had a listener question relating to what you touched on earlier about paying attention to detail and having sort of set way of doing things. Would you say that every editor has their own preference on how they do things, or is there a set way of doing it? Karen S., you said about giving feedback. And I think this is what the listener meant, because they said, as a new writer, I often have situations where I think it would take longer for the editor to write a comment than to change things themselves. So is that just a personal preference, or is that something that an editor is told to do?
I think it really depends on the context. Mm-hmm. So if it's like a fee-based bit of writing that the writer perhaps doesn't feel like a huge affinity with, and doesn't really want to have to go through several drafts because the fee doesn't allow for that, then I think the writer would probably be quite happy for the editor to directly kind of make those changes that they think are necessary. But I think if it's like at the other end of the continuum, I think if it's a piece of material that the writers might be, earning royalties for, and it's their name which is going to appear on the book, I think they want to, have the last say. Or certainly not just have an activity rewritten or a text replaced by the editor without being consulted. And in my experience, writers sort of quite like it when an editor kind of gives them suggestions, or sort of says, this X is possible, but Y is also possible. And I think they both work. Which do you think which do you want to kind of include?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what the person was referring to when they asked the question. That was the example they gave us. Yeah, I like it personally. Yeah,
it's probably a good idea at the outset of a project for the editor and the writer. If we're talking about a freelance editor, then the writer and the in-house contact to agree a way of working. Shall I, as an editor, shall I make all the changes? Shall I make the changes in track changes so you can see what I've changed and then you can accept them, or you can reject them, or then we can have a discussion about it? Or shall I just I'll make suggestions and you can change anything you want? Or shall I make a certain level of change, and then anything that's a bit deeper or more content, shall we discuss it together? Having a conversation about all kinds of things that is going to come up in the project is a good idea at the outset, but that's definitely one thing that it's easy. We can save time, we can save misunderstanding, we can save lots of everything.
Yeah, definitely. I quite like it when an editor makes a suggestion, because often it works better, but even if it doesn't, at least it's got you thinking about why you wrote what you did in the first place and why it potentially might not work.
Yes.
Change it.
Mm-hmm. I think if the editor says, because there are different stages as well, aren't there, that an editor can, sort of go to. So if the editor finds something that doesn't work, they can just say, look, this isn't working, and explain why it isn't working. Or they can do that, but also say, and this might be a way of kind of replacing it. I think you always need to know why you have to change something, what it is about what you wrote that isn't working.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Whether you change it or whether the editor changes it.
Yeah, of course. So we've talked about freelancing a little bit, but in your own experience, I mean, we said if you have your in-house connections, that's a good way to find work. But are there other ways to find freelance editing work? And then what would be your top tips for sort of sustaining freelance editing work?
Well, for finding freelance work, your network, whether that's in-house or freelance, is essential. And I mean, the best places to do networking are within social media groups these days, and whether that's ELT Publishing Professionals, other networking groups on Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever your preferred platform is, they're all there. And you need to, find your tribe, if you like. When I set myself up as a freelancer, actually going back before that, as I left Macmillan, I realised that I was moving away from Oxford. I was moving to the countryside. I was moving to a place where I didn't know anybody, and I suddenly realised that actually, if I don't keep in contact with this group of editors that I know as I go freelance, I'm going to feel a bit bereft. So I set up with Helen Holwill. We started organising freelancer lunches fairly regularly in Oxford. I mean, a lot of freelance ELT editors are used to be in and around the Oxford area because they worked at Macmillan or they worked at UP. Richmond is now in Oxford. Burlington used to be in Oxford. So there was a sort of critical mass of freelancers in Oxford, and as time goes by, people disperse. But we used to get a big group of freelance editors for a lunch every 6 months or something, and it was just a place to say hi and what's happening, who's doing what. And as that went on, Helen and I sort of thought, well, we could do more with this. Let's do an away day. So the sort of freelance ELT away day came into being, and that was just a 1 year. Let's get all the freelance ELT editors together and we can share stuff. And that sort of has blossomed into networking groups. I set up a Facebook. Wasn't a page because I didn't know about it. Was a page, but it wasn't a group. And I thought, I'll do a tip for freelance ELT editors every day on my page. And that was good while I could think of tips. And then I had to start saying, other editors, give me tips, let's share tips. And it grew into something really good. And then, over time that's morphed into other things like ELT Publishing Professionals and other groups. But but networking and keeping in contact, whether everything's online, doesn't matter whether you're in the other side of the world or in the UK. It's easy to chat and share experiences and find where those people are that are doing and thinking about the same things that you are, and that's crucial.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Karen said, and I'd just say that the ELT Publishing Professionals directory that's what it's there for, to help people to matchmake really between freelancers and publishers, or freelancers and packagers, or even freelancers and other freelancers actually, because if a freelancer is project managing a course and is looking for other people to work on that course with them, they can post JobSpot adverts kind of in the directory and find people that way.
Really good. The Freelancers Away Day was what launched my career essentially, because I was writing and teaching alongside, and then I think I met you, Karen, and you and Sue were standing at the ELT Teacher to Writer table.
Oh, yes.
And I was really nervous. And I was so nervous. And I approached Sue and I asked her for some advice and things. And then, I wrote down sort of Morsig, IA TEFL, Publishing Professionals was just launching, I think, at that time. So I joined early and then, got a job through there, and then it sort of blossomed from there. So
and you never looked back, hey, Billy?
Never looked back. No, thank you. I think it is definitely 100% worth joining Publishing Professionals. There's been lots of editing jobs that have come up in the last month, especially. So, yeah, it's great. And will the away day come back, do you think, face-to-face one day?
Coincidentally, we were just talking about it this morning. And I think it will. I think we all need a bit of in-person kind of contact. Watch this space.
Good. Look forward to that. So apart from ELT Publishing Professionals, are there any other professional development websites, groups, webinars, podcasts that you'd recommend?
For editing in general, as we said earlier, there aren't specifically ELT editorial training courses. The CIEP, which is the Chartered Institute of Editing and Proofreading, used to be the SFEP. That is a great go-to place for editorial training, certainly in the UK anyway. And that's one place that you should have a look at if you are new to editing. I'd look there. There's an editor called Louise Harmby. She has got a great website where you'll find loads of information about PDF markup and loads of sort of business guidelines and how to set your rates and stuff like that. Her website's really good. And there are a couple of hashtags that I like, particularly on Twitter. ACES Chat, that's ACES Chat. It's the American editors, it's like the American version of the CIEP. They have a monthly, hourly chat, and they've got different topics every month. But some of if you look back at the hashtag ACES Chat, there's loads of tips, and I really like following that. It's usually, for the UK, it's usually about 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, but they advertise the date ahead of time, and I really enjoy that one. Work in Publishing Week at the moment, hashtag Work in Publishing, that's all over Twitter and LinkedIn at the moment. There's some good nuggets out there which are worth following. And then, of course, the ELT Teacher Writer books, which not just best practice for authors, but also back up an editor's insight into the writing process, which will help them during the editing process too.
Yeah. Karen S., would you add anything to that?
I think in terms of blogs, I rather like Pete Clement's he sort of rattles through kind of the latest news in ELT, doesn't he? And that's quite fun and easy to digest. And then I also quite like Philip Kerr's more serious blog, which I think is called Adaptive Learning in ELT.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of webinars, obviously ELTPP does bi-monthly CPD webinars, which are worth keeping an eye out for. And I also think that publishers' webinars are worth tuning into too, because they're usually kind of talking about new trends, or if they're kind of covertly promoting their new courses, they're sort of like linking it to some new trends and methodologies or whatever. So I think you can learn quite a lot kind of from that. And in terms of podcasts, I think your very own podcasts are an excellent addition.
Thank you. I think it's really useful, actually, mentioning hashtags. I think that's something that maybe people don't really think about too much. You can find them on LinkedIn and Twitter, Instagram, lots of places like that. That's a really good recommendation.
There's one more podcast that I like, and that is the Editing Podcast by Louise Harmby, who I mentioned earlier, and Denise Cowell. Denise is an ELT editor. The Editing Podcast is generally, it covers a wide range of editing types, but they have mentioned ELT editing in the past, and it's one of Denise's areas of expertise. So check that out.
Definitely, yeah, that's really good, especially if someone is just looking into editing, perhaps considering getting into editing as well. That's a really good place to yeah. So we've touched a bit on this, but we have a listener question about skills and experience for editors. So what skills and experiences should editors have in order to be hired as an editor?
And this is to be hired as a freelance editor, I guess.
The question came from a teacher, actually, on Instagram. Okay. And she said that she was thinking about developing within ELT, and she didn't know whether she wanted to go to writing or editing. So I think she just wanted to know sort of what her skills and experience was best suited to.
Well, if you were going for an in-house job, I mean, I think just to pull together the things that we've talked about kind of in answer to different earlier questions, obviously teaching experience, which she's got. Publishers like to have that backed up with a teaching qualification, a CELTA or a Delta. Possibly, I mean, my background was in kind of repping, which I think kind of brings a certain perspective in, which can be quite useful.
You basically need to be a teacher and apply for a job, and you might be given an editing test. Should we mention editing tests?
No, I don't think so. What's an editing test?
When I went for my interview at Macmillan, I was given a unit of Inside Out to look at and comment on, so that if I was asked for a second interview, I'd go back and talk about what I had seen in the unit and how I might suggest changing it.
Mm-hmm. Other people that I know that have gone into editing, they've also done the same, and then they had to present sort of the things that they've changed and sort of justify them as well. And my final question, this wasn't on the sheet, I'm going to test you. And how can you see ELT editing changing in the future? Do you think the move to digital will affect anything? Obviously, editors will need to broaden their skills, perhaps, but what other changes can you see happening?
I think it will become more and more templated as schedules kind of become shorter and shorter. Publishers and packagers kind of want to cut out as many stages as possible. And there are certain things where, why reinvent the wheel? If there's a design that works for a workbook, for one workbook, then it's quite likely that it will work for other workbooks as well. So I think so then the question is kind of what impact does that have on editors and editing? I mean, it should mean that there should be kind of like fewer proof stages that project goes through, so that, the production schedule is shorter. I think that's one change.
I think one change that we're seeing already is the move away from hourly rates to fees for work. I think it's increasingly common that a set fee is offered by a publisher or a packager to an editor. And there's, varying degrees of negotiation available on that fee. In the past, the majority of work was done by, paid hourly. And I think increasingly hourly work will be phased out and fees will be in.
And then perhaps as well, Catherine Munt of Phoenix did a CPD session for ELT Publishing Professionals. It was the last one a couple of months ago. And she was talking about working for packagers. And she was talking about how, and this is a definite trend kind of in the industry, that more and more work is going through packagers. She was talking about the importance of subject matter specialists, or subject matter experts, SMEs, I think they're called, which was new terminology to me, which is kind of people who, the people who would traditionally be the development editors, the content editors, who have got experience and real skills in developing content, in shaping materials. And that the other kind of skills like proofreading and copy editing might be kind of more generic. They might not require people with specifically from an ELT background, but people who are just expert at that actual discipline.
So thanks both so much for coming on and for sharing your expertise. We'll put a link to ELT Publishing Professionals and Teacher to Writer and the other platforms that you mentioned, like CIEP as well, along with the episode. So thank you so much. And it was great to meet you both.
Thanks, Billy. See you soon.
Thank you very much. That was a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye. So thanks so much to both Karen Spiller and Karen White for coming on the show today. Be sure to sign up to ELT Publishing Professionals for regular editorial job posts and to take a look at ELT Teacher to Writer's site to find professional development books in many different aspects of ELT. If you enjoy the show, please do show your support by heading to buymeacoffee.com/ELTCPD. Every coffee counts towards us preparing and delivering you free podcasts on all things ELT. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn and Facebook, ELTCPD, all one word, for the latest job posts and updates on our next episodes. If you have an idea for a show, please do get in touch, info@eltcpd.com. Thanks again for listening. Bye.